Hello and welcome to another edition of Ephlux Insights. We once again have Sasha Strauss, the Managing Director and Founder of Innovation Protocol, my ideal brand manager, if you will. And we're going to be talking about one specific topic. Sasha and I were having a bit of back and forth after one of his he had a session at Google Colombia, and he just happened to mention that he's worked on Adobe Creative Suite, which I think is something that you should brag about as often as possible, but he doesn't think so. So that says a lot about the rest of the work he has done. I just want to just jump into it. So first of all, congrats on being able to speak at Google Colombia. It's a really big accomplishment, I would say so. And thank you for spreading the word about how we need to have chief believer-oriented marketing in terms of that filling that void. So thanks for that, and also thanks for taking up the time to speak to us today. We just jump right into it. So Professor Sasha Strauss, could you tell us about the experience of creating the entire brand architecture of, wait for it, Adobe Creative Suite? That's awesome. Just go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mavar, and I appreciate that you celebrate the things that I've done so effectively. I don't obviously self-reflect on these things, so it makes it special when you get enthused by them. I'm happy to share these stories because I learned so much in these processes. I mean, I can't tell you enough about how doing is the most impactful learning platform you could possibly consider. So when it comes to solving, call it brand architecture issues, you're not going to get it in a book or talking to me. You're going to get it by doing it. And that's literally what happened with the Adobe brand architecture. This was a long time ago, so you're really racking my brain, and I'll do everything I can to give you the detail. But just for context, it was one of those consulting engagements where a colleague and I were getting on an airplane every 2 days at 5 a.m., flying up to San Jose, and right from the airport, like in the building, and we're meeting with this executive and that executive for these reasons, and we're talking to engineers this day, and that day we're talking to the creative directors, the ones who are the artist visionaries in the business, and then founders and board members, and it was like just, I mean, in like a consultant's life, for like 3 months to be that engrossed in a business to the point where, you I recall I was dating someone at the time, and I gave them Adobe Creative Suite as a gift. That was the birthday gift for her, like that's how it that's how attached you get with spending that much time caring so deeply about a business. But so now that you have the context of the consulting engagement, I also mentioned that I had a peer in this. I had a coworker at the firm that I was working for, and he and I complemented each other in lots of ways that made it fun and manageable. If you had to go about solving a problem of that scale by yourself, it doesn't matter how talented and how much time you have. You really need someone to bounce ideas off of. And since then, he's gone on to start his own firm and done well too. So, all right, so let's get into the problem that Adobe had. I think almost everyone on the planet who's ever worked in business has used Microsoft Office, right? So Microsoft Office has a series of products, things that are designed for word processing, things that are designed for presentation design, and the products are individually named. They have their own words that describe what they do, but in the grand scheme of things, Microsoft figured out a long time ago that, oh my gosh, the same person uses 2 or 3 of these tools. Let's sell them as a set. And in economics, you learn that selling somebody one thing is so expensive. It costs you so much to get them to buy from you one time. Your profit is made on the second, third, fourth item, and that's why fast food restaurants want to sell you a meal. So it's the same concept, but Microsoft products had overlapping value, and so selling them as a Office suite made tons of sense. Well, that was the #1 best-selling software in the world, and I may still fact be to this day. But the #2 best-selling software was not a suite, it was individual products manufactured by Adobe. And anyone who's ever hired a designer or been a designer, anything that's rendered digitally on the computer often starts with or ends with an Adobe tool. And Adobe has continued to acquire new tools, both by building them themselves but also buying from other companies. For example, the internet flash revolution, where animation was brought to the web, totally enabled by a company that Adobe acquired called Macromedia, of which I worked on that integration into the portfolio, which was so
Well,
fun.
of course you did.
It was so cool, so fun to be like, okay, I'm now at Macromedia's office.
Right.
So, people, how do you feel about the products you build? All right. So you see that the issue, if anyone recalls, more than 10 years ago, the Adobe product purchasing experience was you bought Photoshop and you kind of like suckled it. You just took as much out of it as you possibly could. And when is it time to buy the new one? Do you wait 2 years? Do you wait 3 years? And not only were you sort of like holding on to the asset for as long as possible, but it wasn't abundantly clear in their communications or in the product design that the products are actually cousins and they work super well together if you use two of them or three of them on a project. Now, a seasoned creative might know that, but everyone else, which is 98% of the market, okay, has no idea that when you buy product, Photoshop version 9, that it actually works with your Illustrator version 11 and InDesign version 1. It's like, how are you supposed to triangulate on those products and say to yourself, oh, I can buy these three things at the same time and they'll hang out great? It's not conceivable for a consumer to arrive at that conclusion. So the business, Adobe, via its leadership, said, like, all right, how do we get people to realize that these things are not only related, but they're actually so compounding in the value that they create that anything less than using two or three products is actually a specialty. You're specializing. You're just doing one thing rather than employing your creative talents, sort of across the divide. And I'll give you a great example of this. You might have an artist render your brochure artwork, but if you want that brochure to be printed, literally made into physical form, that's a different production process, and there's a different application for that. Well, the designer could create in the computer all day, but if it hasn't manifested physically, they're really not going to be able to truly manufacture the perfect answer, right? They need that connectivity in the ideation through the output. So that's why using two or three products is good for everyone. Now, the nature of the process, though, was that Adobe, much like lots of Silicon Valley businesses, directed by engineers, the producers of the asset. Rightfully so. They're the knowledge workers. They're the deep thinkers. They're productizers. So lots of respect for what they play and do. But the challenge was that they were also influencing the communication.
Right.
You either had communication that was influenced by those that were building, or you had communication that was directed by acquisitions. Yeah. Adobe bought a company and used its product name and attitude, right? Yeah. So that you can see how that makes you feel like, as a consumer, sort of sitting back and looking at it like, wow, does this company have its stuff together? Or is it kind of like herding cats, So they ultimately decided that productizing the suites was necessary for the future of the business, and that's where they hired the firm that I worked for, and that's where I got to take on that role. I was technically quite young at the time. It was much more so that the firm that I was working for had an astounding reputation, and the coworker who was assigned to the project had a reputation all his own as well. So that's how I got brought into the project and got to lead it through the end. So you get a sense of what we were tasked with and the market opportunity, and not only the market opportunity, but the opportunity to actually get the engineers for one product and another to actually hang out and be like, hey, you and I will win. Your product and my product would move more if we actually had a synchronized development schedule, meaning that when we released product, we released it together. And not only released it together, but we actually stopped calling yours version 9 and mine version 11, and we reset the dial so that we're actually releasing on the same cycle. So you can see that that was actually a business decision
Yeah.
influenced by a brand need, which is strange. You know, that's not what you expect from branding. You expect
Yeah.
that business tells branding what to do, not that branding figures something out and goes back to the business and is like, hey, we could sell a lot more stuff if we just help people understand that we're in this together as a suite of solutions.
Cool.
I'll end with on the description of this, and then we can take your question. Uh, then eventually they needed to name it. Okay, so not only did we explore all the different types of ways of architecting the products, do we build them into sub-suites? Do we actually name them individually, rename them all individually, so it looks like Lego systems, and you're just like blocking them together as you build product? And we had to come to the agreement that it actually can't be a significant derivation from what people were accustomed to at buying software at the time. It was a once every 2 year thing, and it was not only once every 2 years, but there had to be some type of user interface upgrade. So that type of system, that cycle, was very natural. And so when we decided what to call the product, we basically identified who the target audience was, creatives, who deserve their own suite of solutions. Okay, let's not make it fancy. Adobe, the brand itself, is so filled with energy, so special in its own right, that to actually call the Creative Suite something intense, nuclear awesomeness, some creative name that makes it sound like it's special, would have detracted from, listen, in the end, we report to Adobe. Adobe is what we're fighting for. These are versions of its cause. So when we named it Creative Suite, we also had to ask ourselves, how are we going to version it? What I mean is, do we say version 1, version 2, version 3? Or do we do something truly creative and say, no, we just release them in colors. This version is red. Now, nothing about it, the product necessarily is red, but
Wow.
colors are a global system. It doesn't matter what language you and I speak, we know what red is. We know what green is. We know what blue is. So imagine every 2 years there was just the release. I'll give you a really fun example of this. The band Weezer. If you ask, like, what albums have they released? Well, there's the blue album. There's the green album. In fact, they have an album called Pinkerton that people don't call Pinkerton. They just call it the Pink Album.
All right.
Point, though, is that you can use lots of different types of information architecture, whether it's alphanumeric or whatever, to show that this is a new version of something. So I went back and looked at the decks from years ago per this call, and I'll tell you that the the versioning systems we explored would tickle any business mind. I mean, we went as far out as, like, could you use birds? Like, different birds. And now, listen, that sounds insane, but what does Apple do when it releases a new OS? They call it a cat. Some type of cat, some type of large cat. And you get it. You get, people can literally ask you, like, oh, what version are you using? And you're like, Tigre, whatever the iteration is for you. And that makes it clear what state you're in when it comes to the product experience. So you'll notice that we ultimately called it Creative Suite 1, Creative Suite 2. And the reason simply was that that was what is called planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
Everyone has experienced planned obsolescence in their consumption behavior. It's basically when a company decides that, listen, we're going to do something new in the future, and we want you to know that when we put that much work into this new thing, it means that you have to abandon the old thing. It's literally the old thing, right? So planned obsolescence is a way of suggesting to the consumer at purchase that there's a date stamp on this product's lifetime, and that date stamp is very obvious. For example, Babar, you bought Creative Suite 1. Well, guess what? Creative Suite 2 just came out. I haven't told you anything about it. I haven't told you what's prettier or fancier or more capable.
Yeah.
Simply the fact that you know that you have the older version of it will impel you to contemplate purchase.
Yeah. Apple does this all the time. They release a phone within, like, by the time you get used to the new phone, just another version's come out.
So first and foremost, that is by design. And two, the consumer actually needs a trigger. If you said, well, let the consumer figure it out, well, that's the problem, is that they're not going to, because there's not enough information. There's not a way for them to feel like they're making a good choice. I'll give you a great example. My mother, who isn't necessarily the most tech-savvy person in the world, but is curious and insatiable about technology, she wants the new iPhone when it comes out. She's talking about getting it, but she doesn't actually know what makes it better, faster, smarter, anything else to that degree. She understands that in the hierarchy of numbers, she has an older one and there are imperfections in it. She feels those imperfections, so her inclination is to climb, climb, climb. Literally, you know what I mean? Save to like buy the next one so she can apply it. And she needs that guidance, because if there was just a plethora of vague choices, you know,
Yeah.
you see my mom walking around a store being like, oh, well, this device works for me. No. And my mom was a great example of the world's population, you know. We can't expect everyone to technically get the divine functionality of the machine we've built, you know.
That's pretty cool. Idea of obsoleting the product. So when they released Retinol, was it along the lines of the rainbow, or was it or just a random assortment of colors? Or was there some
Oh,
idea behind that?
so let me say, like, for example, if I asked you to count, you could say, well, I can count in English, or I can count in Arabic, I can count with pictures. I could show you the number signs, right? So there's infinite ways to render numbers, including you could use Roman numerals, and the
Yeah.
world would end, right? Okay, so we explored all of those systems. So take all alpha characters, and then take all numeric characters, and not
Yeah.
only did we explore them in every direction, but we actually analyzed global sensitivity to them, comprehension, all that kind of stuff to make sure that, like let's say we use Roman numerals. Well, anyone who was just destroyed by the Romans is going to be maybe weirded out by it. You know, oh, it sounds crazy, but like you don't bring Japanese samurai characters in video games to
Yeah.
Korea. Korea will not buy video
Yeah.
games where the Japanese samurais are kicking ass. That's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
against their principles.
Yeah.
So, you know, we just have to be cautious about those things. And so that's why when we explored the alphanumerics, we were judicious. But I will say that that is just me using an analogy, in fact. We
Yeah.
explored the same spectrums on words. Like we could have just used words. What if we wrote out the numbers actually in letters? Or
Yeah.
color systems, geography, planets. You know,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
fun would it have been like,
Yeah.
Adobe Neptune,
That
right?
sounds pretty cool, actually. Right now, just
Well,
thinking about that, because
now,
you could go by which planet is the biggest. So I guess that is Neptune.
well, God, your nerdism is fantastic. The Neptune, yeah, think about that. It got you emotionally excited, maybe because you related to it, but also like we've grown up with the planets in our Western education. I think
Yeah.
uh, the the planet added flavor. It like made the Creative Suite more interesting to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, recognize that that happened.
Yeah.
Now, as a brand thinker, back out of how that made you feel, because it was really cool. Back out of it and
Okay.
ask yourself about the purchase process.
Okay.
Okay, Neptune is cool, but how do people buy software? Oh, that's going to get convoluted. They're not going to be able to tell Neptune from Pluto just
Yeah.
because you know that Pluto technically is not even a planet anymore,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so here we are stuck in this conundrum of like science nerd interest
Yeah.
and what really happens in a market that is not us.
Yeah. But from the well, your point is absolutely right. But if I'm sure people are going to be watching this. One of the things that might come up is if I'm going to plan obsolescence and I'm going to do it with the planets, maybe I'm going to imply obsolescence by mentioning Pluto since it's not a planet anymore, or it's not classified as not a planet anymore. Just starting off that way, that just so you know, this particular phrasing means this, that it's no longer going to be a continued product. Uh,
Good
so,
stuff.
but yeah, thanks for that. Is there what was the outcome of that? I mean, this how long ago is this? This is before Innovation Protocol, so we're talking
Yeah.
pre
This,
2007.
this is
Uh,
two firms, but this is yeah, three job. Innovation Protocol is almost 8 years old. Is 8 years old now. So
Yeah.
there was a firm I worked for prior to Innovation Protocol, then it was the firm before that, and it was um, it was a long time ago. It was sort of before, now we use the internet to inform business choices constantly.
Yeah.
It has it's robust enough to have the right information for us to make informed business choices. When we were calculating what to do on Creative Suite, it was pre that era of information availability. It was sort of the earliest dot-com
Uh,
boom era timing,
hmm.
and um, that made it hard to get information like you would want to make a decision of that.
Yeah. You could have just gone on Quora and asked people, can you give me variations of various lengths of various types of anything? And they could give you a bunch of answers. It's an amazing
Well,
resource.
you see how you just sort of casually joked about that.
Yeah.
My gosh, what you had to do then? You had to get on a bulletin board and like create an ID for yourself and like build trust with all of the other folks, typing with their hex keys. It's like a different time. You can ask and you can learn effortlessly now, and that's why branding is just like such the topic of the day.
Yeah. All right, cool. So brand architecture on Adobe Creative Suite. So could you tell us a little bit about how how other companies should start their process of building a brand architecture? And we'll just like put one industry example in there. I'll just like hone it in. So I just I asked around a couple of people what kind of businesses do you think need brand architecture? There's a business in the Middle East, and it's also in well, according to LinkedIn, and I had to really prove it to colleagues recently. According to LinkedIn, Pakistan falls into Middle East. I don't know how. It actually by that category in Middle East, there's a business called Snack Attack, which has changed it's a dine-in food joint. It's changed its logo 3 times in the past 5 years for just for the purpose of maybe they weren't sure about which logo would appeal to to the market that they're targeting. Apparently, their quality of food has dropped significantly. People have complained about the portions. What they did at one point was they had a lot of variety of foods, and this is for the lower tier market. I would say SCC and B minus, since SCC are the people purchasing the product, and I'm basing that on the price and the locality and the locations that it's based in. That's the only information sets I have, and so they had a lot of products, and what they ended up doing is they cannibalized other products because they weren't selling that well. But then it turned out that backfired because people were buying that from a home delivery perspective, or they're just buying that from a side order perspective. But that was the main attraction. So companies like this that make decisions without I mean, one of these days you'll come on our side of the world to the Middle East, and you'll see how you'll meet gigantic organizations that don't have, wait for it, a marketing department. Like they don't have one. You ask them, so who handles, you know, corporate communication, if nothing else? Who handles investor relations? Oh, that's the CEO's job, or that's the chief operating officer's job. So they'll like get an agency in once a year to handle something. So the question is, so what is the purpose of brand architecture, and how should businesses that are haphazardly growing but don't have an understanding of marketing, how should they start with their brand architecture, understand their businesses, and benefit from the methodology of a brand architecture? And you could totally like sell your UCLA courses right now. It's all good.
So the snack attack business that you just referenced in Pakistan,
Yeah.
everything that you described was not a brand problem. That
Okay.
is an ineffectively run business, a misunderstood consumer, a bad product strategy.
All right.
Everything that you just mentioned, they probably blamed on their brand, hence changing the logo 3 times in 5 years. That's them saying, oh, people are misunderstanding us. No, they're actually understanding you quite well, and that is why you're being rejected. So
Okay.
first and foremost, let's give brand a break and respect that a poorly operated business or bad leadership or bad product, it cannot be masked by an effective brand strategy because we live in the internet era. You don't get to make up stories about who you are and why you matter and expect the internet to believe you. There has to be
Yeah.
breadcrumb evidence across the internet that you are who you say you are.
Yeah.
So now to the brand architecture question for anyone in business asking themselves why it would apply. First, of all the things that happen in brand strategy, from what do we name a product to who's our core consumer and how could we better understand and speak their language, to trade show experiences, whatever the sort of brand exposure business might entail. Brand architecture is the one that has the most business strategy embedded in the answer. What I mean is, if you're asking, what color should your product be, that has to do with, well, what other products exist in the market, and thus how could we be differentiated? You can sort of do a deductive analysis, but there's still personal opinion. You're still going to get creative about it. Brand architecture is built on the single premise that it is easier, if it is easier for people to buy your product, easier for them to understand what product is right for them, they will buy more and buy often. So even if you're selling enterprise software, if your offerings are easy to understand, relate to, talk about, then I'll buy more, and I will also create an allegiance because it'll actually be how I describe what it is that I'm doing in the business.
Yeah.
So
like you mentioned a lot about Tesla. They don't sell their product by trying to sell their product. They sell their product by educating their consumer, and therefore the consumer ends up selling it on their behalf. That's an amazing channel partnership network.
Yes, I do want to put parameters around brand architecture, though.
Right.
Often people think that because it has the word architecture in it, it means design and build and actually. That is not in fact the case. The fact is that brand architecture is almost think about it like if you were looking at an org chart, where you're thinking about a hierarchical system that reflects the relationship between family units or business units. That's the technical version of brand architecture, and that's where it becomes a business strategy question. For example, what markets are we going into, and how do we position our product portfolio for that market? Brand architecture is that calculation of how, when the consumer, the buyer, whoever the buyer is, it could be the government, it could be a university, okay? When the buyer arrives at our communication, our website, our sales team, whatever, are they going to be able to figure out what we sell it, and therefore pick the right product, or are they going to have to come in and be like, listen, I don't understand anything that's going on here. What do you do and how do you do it? You recognize that immediately conveys a business that is not on top of their game, that is falling behind and sort of fumbling through the process. Where one who says, oh, these are the things that we sell, this is what they do, this is why they're related, this one is most relevant to you given your specific needs. It's like, oh, what a simple transaction experience, now I feel compelled to believe.
All right, cool. And I have to ask this, it comes up a lot, at least based on sort of audience that we managed to create. And what will often happen is, like I mentioned about a university that I've recently partnered with in terms of knowledge sharing. So they'll look at your videos and then they'll ask, is it possible we can bring him in? Is it possible that he teaches executive education courses along the lines of what he's already speaking about it? Which it turns out you don't, which is kind of mess up. You don't teach executive education courses on your brand strategy. I guess you're busy. That's why. But okay, we've covered that part of brand architecture. Could you move into to give people a context of examples? How would you approach this business that I've just referenced with the limited information that you have? How would you approach a business like this, or perhaps give you a bit of context of how in the Middle East, if I would ask someone, why do you go to this local business for food? The usual answer is value for money, and the secondary answer is, even if people don't feel like necessarily there's value for money, if that's not the first criteria, they usually say, I can walk away feeling like I'm full without having to feel like, well, let's go to dessert here or there, and that is the success for the business. So keeping in mind basic information that I've just given you about cultural understanding of what is considered a successful food business, because in the Middle East, people have no shortage of disposable income. It's not really about the money as such. Value of money, it has a different connotation. What I've told you about the business is mistakes, like you mentioned, are business problems, they're not brand problems, and the information that you have in hand, and what you know about the Middle East as your first or second-hand knowledge. How would you approach a business like this, and what would you tell the CEO in terms of how he should, position his business, or perhaps communicate the value proposition of his business?
Well, you pointed out that the consumer is there. You ask them why, and their answer is value, and that value is not only tangible, they see what they got, but it also is a feeling. They feel full when they've left, and therefore it's been worth their investment. So I agree that those two are very heavy weights in where you should be investing time.
Pun intended. Yeah.
Well, I think that they are they're foundational. They're foundational. You want your customer to leave satiated. They need to feel full, right? Otherwise, their question is, what did I pay for? Amidst those very important foundational items, there are also lots of other things going on simultaneously. And I'll just throw out 10 of them top of my mind, right? There's accessibility, how easy it is to come and go. There's bathroom cleanliness. There's how nice the clerks were. There's the noise level in the restaurant. There's the restaurant across the street and what its experience looks and sounds like. Okay. So my first advice to any leader of a business like that is that you're not in a vacuum, and not only are you not in a vacuum, but you're organic. There are people passing through you constantly. There are forces across the street, almost like gravitationally impacting you. Okay, so if that's what we get as human beings, we get that it's not a store, it's this thing that is incorporated into the lives of the humans coming and going. Well, then you can think about the business slightly differently. You can recognize that when the consumer is in the store, they're so much more likely to buy a second and third thing that keeping them in the store longer may in fact be good for business. All right, well, how do you do that without loitering, right? Well, there's lots of ways you can construct the solution so that the consumer feels like this place is important in their daily journey. And once it becomes a habit of daily journey, then longer. Now you have a reoccurring customer stream that you're just maximizing relationship with. You don't have to go find new customer. That's the most expensive part of business, finding new customer. Okay. Once you have them and they've been inside and they have felt fulfilled, now it's your chance to ensure that it becomes routine and habit, and that only comes with a real respect for them and the feeling they have in the midst of your experience.
All right, cool. And the second question, this is an audience-based question, so it comes from, I would say, a pretty reputable business school in the UK. I won't go into the specifics of the city. And this person is a marketing manager for the MBA program. They mentioned that things like Stanford, Harvard to a certain extent, MIT to a very big extent, are offering online courses, and they feel that the idea of online courses will probably dilute their brand name in terms of, they feel like maybe if everyone gets their certification, they'll feel like if there are too many people with their degree in hand or their certification in hand, it might dilute the value of their business. At the same time, they recognize that their margins are being eaten up by people who do want to take online courses. Whether this is courses, whether you're just attending and you give the 5 hour per day and you walk away with a certification, the way most executive education works, or these are courses where you actually take a test at the end of it, like Khan Academy. In either case, there is that conflict this person faces between, if I do online courses and a lot of people can afford my courses, great, but that snob or that luxury effect that my brand has right now, where people think that if people take this course, you will be connected to people of higher professional net worth, as opposed to, and then there's the offside of it that probably in the long run we'll have to come up with a way of communicating that this is not going to compromise the various benefits you would get out of our institution, and it's just one of those balancing acts. So how would you approach people like this who need to adapt to the new way business is being done? At the same time, they're worried about diluting their brand image to look like it's for the masses now because everyone has access to it.
Okay. So first obligation is for that organization to recognize that not only are they not alone, but almost the entire globe is asking this question. All universities are asking the question, what's right? Therefore, this organization has a data set of the most powerful data. I mean, they're kind of lucky, really. They can do a global analysis and get a sense of those that do this, that do step into the digital realm, and what impact has it had on their perception or distribution or the value of the degrees they render. So we're not going to have to make a decision here based on nothing. We can make a decision based on some really information. I mean, there's probably 4 years of data on it, and it's definitely global, and it's internet trackable. I would put a substantial investment aside to buy access to that data and process on it. Okay. Second thing is that whether they like it or not, the digital, technical, multi-screen revolution is happening in the consumer's home. Thus, it is going to inevitably bleed into the business and the university environment, as it has. For example, executives of the highest rank are using their personal mobile devices. They've got their device that is there. They take it home at night and they sleep next to it, kind of thing, right? So, but wait a minute, isn't that an enterprise access device? Do they have special secret login? Do they have to do an eye scan? Wait a minute, it's their personal device? No, it's also the key to the kingdom, right, at business. So we're in a situation where digital and technical and multi-screen is becoming a part of everything from surgery to food preparation. And so if a university doesn't contemplate its part in that technical revolution, that's being a Luddite. That's really just basically saying, doesn't matter how much progress is being made by these machines, we don't like them in principle, so we're going to basically fight off the evolution. So I'm not saying go all remote in digital classrooms, but study what those have been doing, those others who are contemplating this have done for the last 4 years, and ask yourself, where in this digital revolution do we fall as thinkers, as researchers, as alumni? And then pick a spot. And if you can just direct the energy, the university's network of energy, at being that, the right balance of on and offline, the right balance of face-to-face and group, let that be your unique recipe. And I promise, the consistent voice around that way of thinking is the most valuable asset you could possibly market. So if every single time you market that sole single explanation, you will beat out your competition. Because the competition, the Stanfords and MITs of the world, are all over the place. Their campaigns for studying with them are small and large and this and that and funny and serious and old and young. I mean, it astounds me, really, the ammunition that has been employed by global universities and their inability to effectively communicate. If in fact, if I covered up their name, you wouldn't be able to identify what university is communicating. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well,
I've been on the end of one university that I thought was pretty reputable, offered me an online course along the lines of customer relationship building, and the way they approached me, I thought it was a parody video. I thought I was watching something on 9gag,
wow.
But then it turned out, oh, this is an actual pitch. I mean, there's a date at the end of it. There's a call to action element. So on the one hand, I was like, well, it was funny, and I watched it all the way through. Hopefully, the professor's that funny. But on the other hand, when I have to pitch this to my investors, my board of directors, that hey, I want to go to this course or I want to take this course, so fund me, and they look at the video, they'll be like, doesn't seem too serious. Maybe he's just coming up with an excuse to get away from the office. So I have to think about each side of it.
Here, let's just use this as an example, as an answer to your question that was asked online. Here we have Babar, who's working hard in a world that is flat. He is using technologies and reaching out to people all over the world of all shapes and sizes, clearly learning a lot, clearly sharing what he's learning. and he's having to rationalize it to executives. He's like literally having to be like, hey, executives, this is good for business. Well, the degree program that he selects better look good to business. He better be able to take how the program talks about itself. He doesn't have to dilute it or evolve it. He literally takes it and he goes, executives, this is why this is good for me and for business. The organization, the university that makes that handoff seamless is the one that will win, because you are going to need to justify your choices not only to yourself and your family, but to the business colleagues that are going to judge you.
Absolutely. That couldn't have said it better. So I recognize that you're short on time, Sasha. So we're just going to go into the final part of it. I mentioned earlier in the video that you had spoken at Google Colombia, which is awesome. I wasn't aware that I'm quite ignorant in this area, I'll admit it. I wasn't aware that Colombia had that great of a Google base, or that enough that they would host events at that level. I mean, we don't even have it here in Dubai. So I'm kind of like, we should really get ahead or step up our game. So could you just tell us about how they approached you, and what you spoke about over there about by my understanding of the pictures and okay, there's no videos. By my understanding of the pictures, it was along the lines of preaching about the chief believer that needs to be in the organization, and what I call, well, I've just come up with this word. It's obviously not correct. I call it love-based branding. I mean, you be able to genuinely love your customers in order to communicate to them accordingly. If you just consider it to be a gigantic flirtation process. So I just want to know. So what did you speak about there? And so first of all, how did they approach you? What did you speak about there? What was the response like? More than anything else, in terms of, sure, people attended and went like, this, we can't apply this at work, but then you obviously spoke to them one-on-one, and it changed their perception and the general experience of being in that environment.
Yes. So I was asked by Google about a year and a half ago to do a series of international speaking engagements for these events they host that are like TED, but they call them Think, Google owned. And so I've actually done some really amazing, whether it's all over South America, you pick, Colombia was one of the destinations. And listen, you're not naive, and I don't know that much either. It's hard to get a sense of these nations and who they are and what they're doing. But I'm so happy to tell you, much like my experiences all over the world since, that Colombia is a wonderful place. It's gorgeous, and the people are amazing and deep and passionate and familial, and not only that, but the cities are well developed and artistically rendered, and there's good business being done. And I think that this is a good example for the Middle East. Colombia has been a nation traumatized by war inside itself since anyone can remember. It was one of the drug capitals of the world. There was so much infighting between rebels and the government and U.S. military. In fact, you talk to anyone over 30, and the only life they've ever known is war. So there's this movement going on where everyone's like, well, wait a minute, we've had peace basically for about 20 years. Now, in one form or another, the last 10 years have been stupendous, and the last 5 years have been amazing. But the nation as a whole is evolving and progressing at an incredible pace. So there's kind of like a digital revolution, an entrepreneurial revolution, a renaissance going on in Colombia. And so after speaking at Google Colombia and having a really successful engagement with the top business leaders of the country, I got asked to come back for a government-hosted event called Heroes Fest. Heroes Fest, the best way for me to analogize it is, all of us have heard about Woodstock, this like hippie concert of 3 days in the United States where like whatever, free thinkers came together to like imagine the future. And we know what TED is. Well, if you crossed TED as a like content system and Woodstock as a feeling, that's what Heroes Fest was.
That's awesome.
So the government created a nonprofit called Impulsa, and that organization pulled together leaders from around the world to host an inspiration event for 2 days, 2.5 days, to ignite the 20 and 30 somethings in Colombia to basically set sail for the future of the nation. And I was so fortunate. My co-speakers, the people that I got to speak next to and with, were Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple.
Wow, that's awesome.
super fun. He's an amazing person. The president of Colombia, a couple other really powerful special folks. This amazing man named Jeff Gomez, who basically pioneered transmedia, the notion of transmedia applied to good business. For example, if you are a fan of Avatar, so much of Avatar's impact was not just on screen. It's like all the other digital distribution, associations, partnership, content, social, everything intertwined. That's transmedia.
So yeah. I just want to pause for a second for the audience because it means one of two things. So for the audience, I'm going to guess at 99% certainty that you're talking about the James Cameron movie and not the Nickelodeon cartoon. So just want to clarify that because two things could go through their minds, and the cartoon is more famous in the Middle East. So so continue.
That's amazing. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, I am talking about the blockbuster movie. I think it's one of the 10 most profitable movies in history.
Yeah.
Yes, the James Cameron epic. So good. Thank you for clarifying that. But there you go. Know your audience, right? Here I am off on a tirade, and it doesn't relate because I'm not.
What often happens is people will hear an example, then they go like, okay, I think I know what he's talking about, and then what you say next will keep resonating in their minds, and they'll relate it back and forth. So I don't want people to start thinking about all the characters of Avatar, the cartoon, and start linking it to that. So go ahead, continue.
No, please. So, and thank you for that clarification. So this conference called Heroes Fest, it had DJs, it had very sophisticated business leaders teaching people product development, HR, anything that sort of got people to recognize that as a leader, there's lots of roles to play. So I got asked to do the keynote speech. It was a huge venue, 800 people with this gorgeous. It was at the cultural facility, the Cultural Arts Center, and it was where the president spoke also. And I have to tell you, on a personal level, it felt like one of the most special speaking experiences of my life for lots of different reasons. For example, I speak English, and almost the entire audience speaks English, but their native language is technically Spanish.
Yeah.
So there was a translator in the back who was simultaneously speaking and acting out what I was communicating. And I met with there's actually two of them, before. I spent quality time with both of them so that they knew what I was trying to convey. And so through that translation experience, it was like a team. Like I'm on stage doing my thing, and I know that they're with me, and I see them gesturing with me, and I see their passion coming through. I can hear the sounds, that are coming through people's headphones, and I'm like, this is amazing. So for an hour and a half, we're like, yeah.
It's a choreographed dance.
It was so special, so special. Another thing that was really special was that the South America is very, very social media savvy. They're a very passionate community in all of their forms, and so social is a way for them to be passionate about their family, whatever their cause is. So I got sort of a lot of internet interest before I was there. So interestingly enough, a lot of people who attended the conference was not only invite only, but there was an application process a la TED, which hand-selected the participants. A few of the participants were also awarded a guest. Every one of them that I met was a parent.
Whoa.
A parent. That to this individual, this individual, this entrepreneur, this visionary, this innovator, they got the special ticket to the special conference. The president, Steve Wozniak, perfect. They brought their parent.
That's
and
awesome.
It was really emotional for me because turns out I've been a business traveler for a long time. More airplanes in a week than most people in their lives, and my mother and father always have joked, when are you taking me on a trip? And it turns out that this trip to Colombia, I decided to take my mom.
Wow, that's awesome.
So she came with me and got to be in the audience when I was sort of sharing all this new content, new doodles, better, smarter doodles with richer intentions, all new verbiage. It was really special to get to share that with her and to know that there were plenty of other parents in the room.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I didn't expect that to come out. So I had a question. Yeah. So actually, you're not gonna say this. So and I know the comments are gonna come along those lines that he forgot to mention a point that is quite relevant here. So I've been sharing your video and other videos, not just my interviews, in a couple of the places, and I keep telling people that this guy, what he's saying is the truth. Like this is going to be either people are going to start appreciating this after you pass, which is majority of the time how things usually work around here, or they're going to appreciate you in your lifetime. But if this is, I would say, the pedestal that I would place you at. Even when I started off Ephlux Insights, and we started off with the CEO of Boston Consulting Group, everyone that came next, I had to keep them at the same level. I had to maintain a certain level of quality. And if anyone has second guessed me in terms of bringing you in, I mean, okay, you're at the same level as Steve Wozniak, the president of Colombia. What more do you want from me, people? The audience, I'm addressing you now. What more do you want from me? I mean, I knew it before you did. So that's another reason to be proud. And this is pretty cool that Colombians cherish their families enough that they'd say, this once in a lifetime event, I want to share it with you. It says a lot about their culture and how they approach life. I mean, that's amazing. I'd love to do business there. This just inspired me to, just visit that place.
Well, don't joke about it. A person that I befriended, a great business leader, is a Qatari. He
Right.
uh, not only had roles in the Qatari government, but brought Carnegie Mellon to actually a couple universities. Texas A&M now has a university in Qatar, and he
That's
helps
brilliant.
facilitate that partnership. But nonetheless, um, the uh, the the Middle East opportunity right now is so special and amazing that I think that even though you feel like you're getting tough questions from those that are deciding whether this content is worth your time, you said some really sweet things just now, things that matter immensely to me. I appreciate that you believe that my content and what I'm sharing is worthy of distribution. I don't know where it's, I don't know what the intention is. All I'm trying to do, like you suggested, is tell the truth the best that I possibly can, and do so in a forum that's good for economies, good for business, good for nonprofits. I want organizations to move forward because I know that the organizations that organize and the leaders that lead those organizations are going to be the ones that facilitate what's next. Whatever the evolution, whatever is past war, the next step, it's going to be enabled by these people working together. I'm so lucky to just be in a job where they have great intentions, they've got great business, they just need help communicating it. So
Absolutely.
thank you for those kind comments, and I feel lucky to be on this journey.
No, much deserved, I would say, because we were talking about doodles earlier, and I was mentioning I was referencing something along the lines of when words aren't enough, then you use doodles. So it's come to the point where in the Middle East, we've got okay, and Dubai. I'll just reference Dubai right now. So around 18 to 20% of the population is the Emiratis, the locals, the people who are actually have the nationality. The remainder 80% of the expatriates. You've got pretty much everyone in the room at any given time, which is awesome. Like having a guy from Hungary and then someone from Bangladesh and having someone from
So cool.
France and then Russia, and then you get to ask them all the stereotypical questions like to their faces. It's lots of fun.
How
So along those lines, what often happens is that if someone is not believing a video that I'm about to share, I've come to the point now where instead of showing the video outright, it's one of those things where I do a teaser now. So and it's usually often to just prove a point. So I'll just ask them like your religion or your belief system, what does it believe? And they'll tell me a bunch of things. And I like, okay, so this is what you believe. This is what you're telling me. I'm not asking leading questions. You're giving me these answers, and they say, yeah, this is my legit belief. Then I ask them things like, how, when you're telling your employees that they need to show up at the office at 8 a.m. and you're showing up at 10, how do you think that makes them feel? I put them in the reverse shoes, and they probably think, I don't practice what I preach. They probably think that I put too many expectations on them, and a bunch of other things. They see all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, keep that in mind, and now watch this YouTube video.
Hmm.
And then when they're in that state where they're like, these are my beliefs, and the other guy's, reciprocating, if you will, I believe that they respond much better. This is what I've experienced in the past. I guess I interviewed last in February. I'm not sure, February or March. And since then, this is the sort of learning journey that I've been on. There is New York University, Abu Dhabi, one of the cities in the United Arab Emirates, and they came to us for brand strategy. We pitched something along these lines. I was trying to explain to them building a value proposition in terms of marketing their business in a completely different way. And instead of going into the long description of this, okay, I usually place a lot of emphasis on the professor stance. I mean, as you've probably experienced the way I refer to you as professor, because I place a lot of respect on professors. So I usually tell them, if nothing else, this guy's a professor at UCLA in brand strategy. That should be enough. Okay, that's not enough. Okay, fine. And then I go to the next part, and the next part, and the next part. But now it's come to the point where it's just you tell me what you believe in, and I'll link you to a video that the guy believes in exactly what you do. And usually, believe it or not, I mean, you're not exploring. I don't know if you are proactively, but from what I understand, you're not proactively exploring the Middle Eastern market. When I show people a video of anything you've said, they'll often like email me back and say, I had an epiphany, I had a thought in the middle of the video, and I wrote it down, and I've mapped this whole thing out. Can you quickly come to our office and help us, expand on it? And I don't know how expensive Matt Playman or your other team members are. I'm unable to pull them in for the rest of it, but that's a very big impact. So imagine what it would be like in person, putting you in the room. So that says a lot, right? And a person's watching a video across the room, and they're really taking it in, and they're getting something out of it immediately. And you can't really say. I genuinely was having a talk about this with my lead investor, Ali Nassim, the CEO of Ephlux, and I was just telling him about TED Talks. And while I respect TED Talks and TEDx and all that, I find that often it feels like the same idea rehashed over and over again. I don't feel this is just me personally speaking. I don't feel really inspired by the end of videos. I just listen to a video and like, okay, I think I read about that, but maybe the delivery's off or whatever. But for your videos and other people who are trying to send a message that's basically, you got to be honest, you got to communicate effectively, and you got to communicate what you actually are. And because we've known time and time again that speaking the truth is it's a sustainably much more effective way of going about life than lying, because it's harder to remember the lies and cover up them. You have to lie and lie and lie to cover up the lie. So, and from all these perspectives, it really resonates with people in the Middle East. And when I say Middle East, I'm talking about Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, the 3 countries which I operate in. And just all this rambling was just me saying, please come to Dubai and speak with us and share the goodwill with us.
Well, listen, I think that all of us know what it feels like to be lied to, and it hurts us in a way that is almost indescribable. In fact, in the Middle East, your word is maybe the most important thing that you could possibly share with someone, your commitment, right? That promise. And when that promise is violated, it's very, very hard to repair that relationship. Okay, well, when businesses or universities or religions are trying to get people to care, to pay attention, you gotta respect who's on the receiving end. That they want to trust you, but they're not sure they should. They need some experience to prove that you're worthy. All right, well, listen, call that action whatever you want. You can call it sales, call it marketing, call it anything you want, but that is communication. And you're going to have to communicate why and who and for what reason and how and where and all those things, so that when I ultimately buy from you, it doesn't feel like a haphazard last-minute decision. It feels like a well-calculated choice. And that's where I pay more. That's where I not only pay more, but I tell my friends that I bought it. So this is a universal principle, and I think that it not only matters in the Middle East. I, again, believe the Middle East has an astounding opportunity right now. The civil wars and revolutions going on in the Middle East, I'm disgusted by all parties. I'm disgusted by all parties on both sides. It doesn't matter if it's in Israel and Hamas. It doesn't matter if it's Iraq or ISIS. It doesn't matter if it's the United States working in Libya. Like, everyone has been sort of enwrapped in these projections, these false projections about their intentions and who their partners are. And it's like, for goodness sake, as far back as we can look through any of the history books, this territory has been ravaged by war. I mean, we've always been fighting, and it's like, who has more right to what, for what reasons? It's like, just shut up for a second. Like, everyone just shut up for a second and be like, okay, so the history books of all of our nations say we've been fighting. Well, then let's just make a choice right now. Like, maybe we can actually recognize that that is how we do not want to live now, and that people and their eating behaviors and their religious behaviors can be different, but we don't have to be fighting about it all the time. Like, we just have to decide where there's mutual respect, because there's lots of stuff that's similar. My goodness.
Yeah,
I mean, you can take halal and kosher and be like, there's like a 3% difference. And it's like, come on, everybody. Why don't we just back out of what our fathers have been arguing about?
Yeah.
And just recognize that you and I are organisms alive and awake today, and that we can absolutely relate and support one another without hate.
Yeah. If only, right? If only. I've been trying to preach the peace for quite some time and getting a lot of backlash when we've got extremists everywhere. That's a whole other topic. I could get attacked for this.
It's related to business. Every business is going to have extremists. You understand? Every business, every religion, every university, every corporation, every nonprofit is going to have extremists. But most often they are the vocal minority. They are loud, but they do not represent the populace. I mean, spend time in Iran and you will recognize that the populace doesn't want these certain activities to be happening. They're kind of stuck in this situation. So before we decide that peace is not possible, or I've been trying to preach the peace and no one's listening, let us acknowledge that the Middle East has never had a communication platform like it has now. The populace can actually talk now. All right, well, maybe that means that there's a future we haven't defined yet.
Yeah. We're actually having something along those lines in Pakistan as we speak. In the capital city, a couple of 100,000, almost 250,000 people have come out to overthrow the government. So I was just asking my CEO if we're going to have an Arab Spring-ish scenario in Pakistan. So let's see how that turns out. And it's only because of one reason: the government lied to its people about, they lied one too many times, and now it's backfired. I mean, make a note to multinational corporations: if this is how people react when you lie one too many times, imagine what they'll do to your company and your bottom line.
So let me just throw out a theory that there's a third choice. So right now you presented two choices: government in control or rebellion. Okay? And let's admit that rebellion is one action, but after rebellion you need to lead. So, we can't just have a rebel plan. We also have to have a leadership plan. And that's time-consuming and expensive. I'd like to present a third option, which is that the people that are leading are of a generation that taught them to lead like that. They didn't come to a conclusion on their own and say, I'm going to screw the people. I'm going to lie to everybody. There's a very good chance that all them that taught them showed them that way of leading. Which means instead of rebelling and going and trying to throw out or manipulate or hurt these individuals, how about 6 seconds of sympathy and then maybe 10 minutes of conversation, where the future of Pakistan, let's be really clear, is not going to happen without the government and without the people. They're going to have to find a common ground and decide that a new future is possible. Well, looking down at the angle of judgment and hating on each other because of history's past or decisions made, without acknowledging that new opportunities are afforded to both sides, we're not going to see a change in Pakistan. I'm sorry. I don't care how big the rebellion or how impassioned they are. I don't care how powerful the government or how much protocol they employ. Until they mutually acknowledge that together we will succeed and apart we will fail, I don't want to hear about rebellion or government pushback or anything that I'm hearing about every single day, because no one's stepping forward with a plan, a leader, and a reason to believe.
Absolutely, and that's a really good note to end on, I guess. It applies on various levels, and we usually started off with, we always start off with our our professions and our work in brand strategy, but this does apply everywhere. I believe it's just about communicating, empathetically and communicating with honesty and with good intentions. Let's just put it that way. In Pakistan and in Middle East, it's called niyat. Intention is everything. I'm sure there's an application on that everywhere, but that's something that we should probably hope that the world can move towards, where the intention is pure, and maybe as a result of starting here and thinking I want to do this for the greater good and not just for myself, everything else, your actions, will reflect that particular mindset. So thank you for the time, Professor Sasha Strauss. Always an enlightening conversation. I mean, I recently found you on Quora, and I was like, hallelujah, because you stopped tweeting at one point in time, so my world pretty much stopped. Because there's some people who will go on BuzzFeed, or some people go on EliteDaily.com and a bunch of other things. There's only like 3 people's sites I go on, and yours is one of them, where if I'm stuck with something, I'll read something that has nothing to do with anything that I'm working on, but something will wake up. And it helps quite a bit. So I found you on Quora, so I'm stalking you there. It works out. And I've sort of like kept restraint to myself not to read the whole thing. You're going to read one thing at a time. So it's quite hard to do that. So anyway, Professor Sasha Strauss, thank you so much for taking up the time. Ephlux Insights is always happy to have you on board. Hope to, in terms of my goals, whatnot, I really hope to be able to call you into Dubai and, partner up with our, the recent partner that we've gotten in terms of the Educational Institute, and have you speak to the Middle Eastern people. I'll even give you a bit of brief in terms of, what the cultural norms are, how people like to talk and all, and you can adjust your pitch accordingly and your content accordingly as you see fit. Like you mentioned about localized strategy, a lot of people gave me a lot of flack after my last interview. They said, I brought up a question about a brand going global, and you were talking about localization, so they're like, haha, he told you were wrong. So I got a lot of flack from that. So localized strategy is the way to go, and I think I've said it 3 times. Thank you very much for always taking up the time for me. It's really, on a personal note, I'm very, I don't think I have the word, I'm getting a bit emotional right now. I'm really always happy, beyond words, that you take out the time to speak to me. When I started off Ephlux Insights, a lot of people told me that as a Pakistani and as a partial Arab, people would not take me seriously. No one would agree to do an interview. But all that went to hell when, for example, Jeff Schumacher of Boston Consulting Group, he was the first person to say, well, your intentions are pure, why wouldn't I do an interview with you? And then as a result of that, more people like yourself came on board and said, your intentions are pure, you want to educate people, and you want to clarify some misconceptions that you're having, which was pretty much my intention from day one. And it is always reaffirming. I mean, I get this sort of surge of motivation and morale. It's going to stay for a good 3 months. I'm going to be motivated for a good 100 days. That this journey that I'm on, it means something more beyond anything else that I want to achieve.
Babar, I want to give you something to hold on to, because you recognize that these intentions of yours, these pure intentions that you are actively sharing, have created goodness. And not only created goodness, but it's archived on the internet for eternity, so that goodness may pay dividends for lifetimes. And you recognize also that there's lots of doubt being cast, people saying, why are you doing this, and are these the right methods, or you said local and she said global, whatever. You realize that this is the rebellion. This is the rebellion, that there is a different way, and it is rooted in kindness, and there is profit to be made, and success to be had, and healthy earth to be rendered. But you don't have to be an asshole. You don't have to hurt people in the process. And I recognize that feels like it's discomforting to the legacy ways. But the point is that we're kind of sick and tired of reading the history books and realizing that not only does history repeat itself, it seems to be getting more disgusting. So here we have an opportunity to legitimately rebel, and fortunately it doesn't matter where you are from or where I am from. All that matters is that we believe the same thing. we really believe that there is a chance for us to rescue humanity through kindness. And if people want to call me an outcast and that I'm part of the resistance for that faith, then here we go, man. Here we go. Like our own little Star Wars.
Yeah, I'm on the exact same end. I've been touting that there's a lot of hate in the Middle East or on various issues, and just having to tell people that this belief that you have about this country, it applies to their army and it applies to their government. It doesn't apply to their people. It's the same thing when people categorize, Muslims in a category after 9/11, and they got offended. I was like, so when you got offended, and now you're doing the same thing to other people, why are you being that offensive? Just acknowledge that it's different people making those policies, and it's slowly seeping into people's minds. And obviously, people like you and I will always be outcasts for speaking that one thing that doesn't pander to everyone else's belief system.
Well, I'll tell you where I come from. When every time I land in a new country and meet new people, is that I realize that it's my job to find out what we relate on, what is similar. I don't seek out what makes us different. I don't say to myself, oh my gosh, that food that they eat is so different from mine, I was disgusted. My agenda in my mind and in my heart always is, I promise there are 30 things that are so similar about who we are that we can relate. It does not matter color of skin or language we speak. And you can see that that's just a different intention, right? It's like walking into a board meeting and asking yourself how you're going to beat everyone, sitting in that chair and be like, I'm going to win the confidence war. Or you can ask yourself, how many people can I connect with? How many people can feel like my sincerity was present in this room? By the way, I promise you'll get so much more out of that conference room. Those people will act with far greater impact if you approach them with connection, if you approach them with empathy and sincerity versus dictatorial leadership where they all feel weak amongst your fist. It just turns, let's put our business minds on and get our supply and demand curves out and just be like, okay, what's going to create the most revenue? Well, it turns out that if you hold down all your leaders, you make them all feel like failures, so they trickle down that dark energy to everyone that reports to them. Turns out, less profit. Less money. Not only less profit, but more employees coming and going, which cost a fortune. Secrets coming and going, which cost a fortune. So, amazingly enough, business minds who only care about capital, I'm with you. Hey, guess what's good for business? Like, let's go,
I love the sarcasm. It's like, did you know that there is a better way of going about business? It's called being nice to your employees, or treat your employees like you would treat your customers. Hopefully, you treat your customers really well, and that's a great note to end on. And as always, I mention over and over again, Sasha Strauss is probably one of 5 people I can think of right off the top of my head, and as you've seen from my interviews, I've interviewed quite a few people who believe that there is a better way of doing business. It's not all about the bottom line. It's not all about the top line. There's a better way of building internal strengths within your organization that can result in that. And the idea that, he mentioned this in an earlier video about if you're going to be that organization that is just bolting down on your suppliers and basically your collaborators. Think of them as your partners. And if you come with that perspective that these guys are partners in my journey towards improving my business, you will act differently. You will proact differently, as opposed to thinking of them as, oh, not just another guy pitching business to me and I have to cut down cost and improve my margin. Because if the value proposition is strong enough and the motivation is strong enough, they will deliver. And it is a tried and tested system. And once again, I reiterate this over and over again, when words fail, he's a professor at UCLA, man. Come on, what more do you need from me? And he was speaking alongside Steve Wozniak and the president of Colombia, a country that, if you asked me before, I'm openly saying this, I don't care. If you asked me before I found out that Sasha Strauss went to Colombia and you said, what do you think about Colombia? The first thing that comes to my brain is Colombian cigars. The second thing that comes to my brain is drug wars. And he's just opened up our minds and told us this country that has been ravaged with wars has somehow changed itself. So the question is, what is your excuse? what is your excuse not to find a better way out of the mess that you're in right now? So I've said this a bunch of times before. I have no issue saying it again. Professor Sasha Strauss, thank you very much for taking out the time. You are one of the most successful people in the world, so you're even like an hour of your time. I would not be able to afford it at all under any circumstances. So thank you very much for taking out the time and speaking to me and educating me, educating our audience, teaching us about brand architecture, teaching us about a better way of running our governments and running our organizations and running our teams for that matter. It is a multi-purpose interview, as it were, but we get more out of it than we can imagine, and it's one of those things I'll watch over and over again, and there's always something I miss out. So thank you very much for your time, and if there's anything you'd like to say in closing, and then we'll conclude.
I'll say the same thing I always tell you, which is it means so much to me that you want to hear these things, that you want to share this information, that you care deeply enough about it, that you work with my crazy travel schedule to find these times where you should be sleeping and I should be in a meeting, and it's just it just means the most. I hope that you get a lot out of doing these interviews and that it's good for your career and good for your family and everything that you're working for, because it's a service to the audience and it's a service to people like me to have people like you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And we'll have a new session in about 3 months after Professor Sasha Strauss has been to another country that we have misconceptions around, and hopefully our minds and our perceptions will open up further. This has been a brilliant session, much better than I expected, and then again, I had high expectations and went beyond that. So this is superb. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Take care.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.